You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 303 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It is a bit dreary, but you know what? It's March, which means that's the month that the Cubs play baseball. So I'm excited about that.
And we have a lot to get to. Spring training is underway. We'll get into all of the on-the-field Cubs happenings in a minute. But we wanted to open up this show, talk a little bit about the business side of things, what's going on in MLB right now and the television landscape, and talk a little bit about that as it's in the news. And we wanted to cover it here. We wanted to bring on someone who's familiar with this topic. So joining us this week, first-time guest on the show, Dan Kaplan from The Athletic. Dan, thanks for taking time out to talk sports business with us tonight.
Yeah, it took you 302 episodes to get me on.
Yes, and we're glad to have you. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the Diamond Sports Group. So they're the corporate parent that own the Bally's Sports regional sports networks, right?
Right. There are 19 of those, and approximately 42 NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball teams are carried by those 19 regional sports channels, 14 Major League Baseball teams. And to take a step back, as I'm sure all your listeners know, streaming is a pretty big deal these days, and that people increasingly are cutting the cord or getting rid of their cable subscriptions. Well, the RSNs depend heavily on those cable subscriptions. And as those have declined, it's become less and less profitable for the companies that own the RSNs. And the one that owns the Bally Sports Diamond Sports Group, it not only has the cord cutting problem, but its owner, Sinclair, borrowed a heck of a lot of money in 2019 to buy them. I think it was about $9 to $10 billion. So between the punches of cord cutting and this debt, Bally's is looking at a potential bankruptcy that could come as soon as next week.
And with those teams, you mentioned that they could be heading to bankruptcy. Are they looking to get out of the RSN business, similar to like Warner Brothers Discovery and what they're doing with the RSNs they own, or are they trying to stay in the business?
It appears to be two separate tracks. The Warner Brothers, the one that you mentioned, they have about 4 RSNs, and they're looking to unload them and get out of that business. And they obviously have a very big business outside the RSNs, whether it's cable or movies or other forms of media. When you're talking about Diamond, that is their business. So while it sounds scary that they're going to file for bankruptcy, and the assumption is that's the end of these media contracts with the teams, that's not necessarily the case. The media contracts with the teams is the most valuable asset that Diamond Sports has. So they will probably fight tooth and nail to keep many of them, maybe not all of them, but many of them. So there's a lot of unknowns here. But I think one of the great knowns is that Diamond is not looking to dissolve itself in bankruptcy. They're looking to restructure. And if they're looking to restructure, they're in the business of RSN. So it wouldn't make any sense to walk away from these media contracts.
What do you think the ramifications from all the teams swept up in this would actually be in real terms, in terms of, you know, if you're the Pirates versus the Phillies or another team, like what do you foresee happening over the next couple of years?
Well, ultimately, streaming is great, but it doesn't replace the money that was coming in from cable on the RSNs. And I mean, that's because, as we all know, the RSNs would get, say, $2 or $3 per subscriber for being carried on the cable network, whether everyone on the cable network watches them or not, and we know they don't. Whereas with streaming, it's a subscriber fee only if you get it. So it's a very small slice of money coming in through cable. So this is a big deal, and how it shakes out is uncertain. But it certainly looks like over time, less media money is going to be coming into many of these teams.
And that's that's obviously the big financial impact. Would the teams see that this year, or are they pretty much are the payments already flowing into teams like the Pirates, or is it something like this restructuring in a bankruptcy could impact cash flow and money coming into those smaller teams?
It depends how the restructuring transpires, and if Diamond looks to renegotiate the contracts within the bankruptcy and what the bankruptcy administrator allows. But the listener should know baseball is prepared for the worst, that these teams suddenly get cut off from Diamond. Baseball is prepared to step in and televise these games. Now, if they do that, it's very unlikely the same amount of rights fees will be flowing to these teams. So there, the effect would be immediate. If Diamond tries to hold on to the teams, and chances are they'll be making most of the payments, because if they don't, it's a violation of the contract, and baseball can get the team out from under it.
Switching over to a team that we know well, the Chicago Cubs, it'd be interesting to get your perception as somebody who's in this sort of industry as to how you've seen the Cubs and the way they've managed media rights over the last decade or so play out. Because I think the perception from a lot of our fan base is that the Cubs were sort of late to the game when it came to getting their own network. They got the marquee network, and it just never felt like the money has materialized the way they had hoped it would for a team that has a national fan base and a pretty big following. What would you say about the Cubs, and what would you say to their fans about how they've handled their media rights over the years?
Well, I don't want to compare the Cubs to Diamond, but their timings were similar. they both got into the RSN business in the late 2010s, around 2019, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, with the Cubs. And that's just as the cable bundle began to disintegrate. I shouldn't say disintegrate, because it's still out there, but began to decline. Back in, say, 2014, there were 100 million cable subscribers. Today, there's maybe mid 60s to low 70 million range. So that's a tremendous amount of subscribers that have been lost. If you were an RSN in 2014, in your market, you might have, say in Chicago, you were expecting 2-3 million subscribers, and each one of them, whether they watch the Cubs or not, would have to pay we're paying a subscription fee for it. Now, you slice 500,000, 600,000 viewers off that. That's a big economic hit. And now the marquee, they're owned by the Cubs. The rights fee payment is probably not. It's paying Peter to pay Paul, but it's not probably not onerous, the rights fee payment they're making to the Cubs. So you're in a better spot if you're a team that owns the RSN or owns a piece of it. But 2019 was not a good year to get into the RSN business.
Yeah, we waited a long time to get into this business because the Cubs had another deal that they didn't want to, or chose not to try to buy out of. And we didn't expect necessarily to get Dodgers money, but was it the Phillies that signed that enormous deal? And I think a couple, maybe in the middle of the teens. And we had really hoped that the Cubs that this money would make them sort of a team that would spend money the way we see the Padres do and the Dodgers do and Yankees do. And of course, that never happened. You're right. The Cubs got into it just in time for COVID, and everything just sort of has never, for a number of reasons, never gotten to where we thought it would. So what's the future for a team like us now?
Well, when the team owns the RSN, it's a different position than when it's a third party paying the team, because when it's a third party paying the team wants as much money as possible. When the team owns part of or all of the regional sports channel, they have economic interest in both, so they don't want the RSN to pay as much. And this is always a negotiation that goes on with baseball, because for revenue sharing purposes, a team can hide revenue in their RSN by underpaying the rights fee. If you're the owner, it doesn't matter. You make money on either side of the transaction. So I don't know what what's on the books for
Oh,
marquee.
I'm sure hiding money is probably the solution we chose.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think of that.
Which model do you think is more overall? Which model do you think is a better model for making money? I mean, leaving aside the hiding part, but having your own network or getting paid for it, which
I think owning your own network in the end will be better, because if you look at these teams that are diamond sports teams, they're facing the prospects of significantly reduced rights fee, baseball having to come and bail them out, get their games broadcast. If you're the Cubs, you don't have that situation. You don't have to worry about being on the air, and the economics. You're working both sides of the aisle, so you can make it work. It's always better to own your own media company.
The Cubs have talked about recently the idea of launching the marquee service in a way that allows fans to subscribe without a cable provider going over the top for that. Have other teams looked into this model? And I'm pretty sure I read in your article that Bally Sports RSN's even considered this as well. Was there? How successful is that? Is that something that because of the challenges with blackout restrictions and other things, you still limit the audience and the potential for making money?
Yes, Bally Sports does have a streaming option, and there's 4 or 5 baseball teams that are part of that. A number of, I think the Red Sox have one themselves through NESN, the New England Sports Network. Madison Square Garden just announced one for the Knicks and Rangers. But what you have to understand is the prices of these streaming options are very high, and that's because if you're a cable company that's paying an RSN money to air its games, you don't want to see that RSN turn around and then stream it for $2 a head, $2 a month, or $3 a month, because that cannibalizes your audience. So the people who are getting the stream have to pay a significant sum of money. I think in MSG's case, it was $30 or $40 a month. The case for the Diamond one was $20 or $30 a month, and it would probably even go up more. So it's a significant expenditure for a consumer who's probably already got 5 or 6 streaming services to suddenly say, I'm going to spend $400 to see my team.
If you're a team that has a national following and a lot of loyal fans, and some who would even pay money, more money than they prefer for that kind of model, is that a model that makes sense then?
It's an interim step, as this the traditional television it's called linear television, and then we have the streaming, and ultimately I would expect in 10, 20 years we'll be streaming everything. But until we get there, there's this uneasy balance between the two worlds, and it's not economic to just stream. We've seen this with the companies, say that Disney Plus, Hulu. Disney has lost like $1 billion every quarter on its streaming services, Disney Plus, ESPN Plus. They're now trying to reorganize those assets by laying off people, charging more, paying less for content. But it still loses a lot of money streaming. I think the only streamer that makes money is Netflix. So it's very, very hard to make money on streaming right now. So if you're a team, you need to have your feet in both worlds, both the linear world, the RSN world, and the digital world with streaming. But streaming is not an answer right now economically.
There's the Scripps company is out there trying to buy up some of these rights to do over-the-air streams of some of these sports properties. Can you explain a little bit? Are you familiar with what Scripps is doing and how that?
Well, Scripps, they own some TV stations. They're not in the sports business. They've talked about they could be a solution. Now, if they got into the RSN business, they would be wanting to pay a lot less than these teams are getting right now. Many of the team deals were negotiated as the RSN model, the cable model, started to decline. So once those go back on the market, they're just not going to get as much money. And if the contracts get renegotiated or thrown out in bankruptcy court, then these are all going to be hitting the market at once. And I guess Scripps looks at that possibility, and they could swoop in and scoop up some of these RSNs. Both baseball and the NBA say they have plans in place to take care of the teams if this situation occurs. Baseball has been building its own local media division. They have 3 executive hires they just made. So it's unclear exactly structurally how this will work. I think it depends in part how a Diamond bankruptcy plays out. But Scripps is just one of the many players looking to scoop up these RSNs.
I have a question on another topic. Jeremy, do you have any more on television rights, or can I?
Last one for me on the television rights. So how do you see the RSN struggles impacting sports television rights fees going forward? Like, does it change how MLB needs to start looking at other revenue streams? Is this a constant decline of revenue streams? We saw some big national deals. Do they try to go more of the NFL television model of getting these big national deals? The TBS deal they got was pretty significant. The Apple TV deal, do they go lean more into that more so than the RSN type of model?
Well, those are 2 separate tracks. One are the local games, and the other is the national games that are shown nationally. And those are 2 separate animals. The teams control the local inventory. The league controls the national inventory. Obviously, the NFL all games are largely national. So the RSN still on the cable systems are among the most watched programming every night that baseball games are on or the NBA games are on. So there's still value there. But if the level of cord cutting reduces or slows or even stops, there's still a business there. Whether it pays the teams as much in the future as they get now, that's probably unlikely. Baseball is talked about more of a national model, and they have national packages, but baseball is still largely a local game. And you see this in, the declining ratings of the World Series, and in other national programming that baseball has, whether it's on Fox or you mentioned TBS. The NBA is going to be in the market with a large deal. It'll be interesting to see how that goes, because if you're TNT or ESPN, the NBA may be a must-have, but you're facing the same issue with cord cutting as all these RSNs are, which is you're getting less money because there's fewer cable subscribers.
So I have a question on a slightly different note, but I think it kind of impacts some of this too. There's this thing that's been sweeping the country the last 3 or 4 years called sportsbook gambling. And I don't think in my lifetime I've seen anything like this in terms of the pervasiveness. Gambling was always verboten in baseball, famously, right? And then the adoption or the embrace of gambling by professional sports teams of all, whether it's the NFL or basketball or hockey, and certainly baseball, has just been staggering in just a short period of time. And we're in Illinois, which legalized sports gambling, 3 years ago or so. And the Cubs are building their own sports book. Not their sports book, but they got, I think, $100 million to put a sports book adjacent to like this historic stadium, as part of the stadium. It sticks out where they used to have sidewalk in the middle of the city. And it seems like everything that you see now in terms of advertising and everything you see is in some way or another gambling related. What's your take on were you surprised at how quickly this happened, and what do you think the implications are for the future?
Well, I find it very concerning when I'm watching the games with my 13-year-old son and there's gambling ads. I know in Europe they don't allow that anymore. There are restrictions on that, and I think there should be restrictions here. The last thing I want my son to do is start worrying about the odds of games and gambling and how much money can be made and parlays and all that. I mean, the cat's out of the bag in terms of gambling in most markets. The casinos, the sports books online, and whether it's online or what they're building next to Wrigley, both the boats left the dock on that one. But I would like to see. It would be nice to see some restrictions on the advertising, especially on games, because there's so many young people that are watching.
I mean, it's on your app. If you go on ESPN or CBS Sportsline, basically anywhere you look, the scoreboards are sponsored by the gambling, companies now. And I think with fantasy football in particular, probably there's already that kind of gambling aspect to football, and maybe with baseball. The reason I thought of it was when you said baseball is typically a local game and football is more a national game. The first thing I thought of was, well, the reason that football is a national game, in addition to the fact that they don't play that many games, is primarily because of gambling. There's whether it's more harmless kind of for fun fantasy gambling or for real gambling, and I wonder if that will impact baseball, because if people, if you're watching a Mariners A's game and you live in Chicago, you could probably, and you're a Cubs fan, you probably care less, right? It's two American League teams, who cares? But boy, you give somebody the opportunity to put money on the game, and all of a sudden it becomes, there's an addictive nature to that, and people might care more. I wonder how.
That's an argument that's certainly an argument that's made, and around the edges. I'm sure it does help TV ratings somewhat, but we continue to see the decline of baseball playoff and World Series ratings. So gamblers don't have to actually watch to
put money down. That's right. Yeah.
So, but the XFL, the third iteration of the XFL that just got underway, they and ESPN is broadcasting them. They have the odds in the scorebug, the scoreboard on the TV screen. It's incorporated into the broadcast every second you're watching it. So this is just part of life. I'd like to see some more restrictions on the advertising so that we're not bombarded with the gambling ads every second during a commercial break.
Do teams see the gambling as like the next frontier in terms of making money? I mean, we talk about streaming services as being out there as a possibility, but in terms of the big money, is that why we've seen this sudden and universal embrace of gambling?
I mean, teams will jump at any opportunity to make money, and this is, formal partnerships, commercials, engaging fans. It's all part of that. The question is whether the teams themselves would take bets on their sites, and we haven't seen that, but the worry is that one day may happen. When I say sites, I mean their websites. I mean,
sure, yeah.
They have gambling sports books now, or physically on the grounds of, for example, the Washington Commanders just announced they would have a sports book in their stadium. The Super Bowl was the first Super Bowl in a state with gambling, and there's a sports book right outside the stadium in Arizona, like you'll have in Chicago.
And for us, we have the mobile options too, which really makes it, very accessible for people.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need a physical sports book. In fact, most gambling is done digitally.
In fact, I've sat at Cubs games the last couple of years and watched a lot of people at the game on their phone gambling on the game.
Yeah.
All right, and last question for me, Dan. We really appreciate you taking time out to talk with us today. It's been incredibly insightful. When it comes to looking at revenue streams for the Cubs, they're also they've struggled with getting marquee onto a lot of the streaming platforms such as YouTube TV, Hulu. They were on briefly, now Fubo TV. So they've struggled with maintaining these relationships or even establishing them. They've never been on YouTube TV, which is one of the most popular services. So a lot of Cubs fans have a tough time seeing games on marquee without turning to nefarious ways. Is having the exclusivity on one a better option for them, or do you see them opening this up and just trying to get on as many as possible for the right price?
Well, it's not that they have an exclusive with one distributor. It's there's whether it's a cable distributor or a satellite distributor, a distributor like Hulu or Fubo. It's all a negotiation, and we've been seeing these for whether it's for 30, 40 years, the negotiations going off the rails between between sports teams and RSNs and cable distributors. So this is really no different. Diamond's had a lot of these problems getting. I think they're still not on the Dish Network, for example. So it's not something that's unique to Marquee as the cable. It's all as cable keeps getting cut. There's less pie to go around, and there's a fight. It's harder to do these negotiations. So it doesn't surprise me that Marquee is not as on many platforms as they'd like to be, because they're probably asking for a certain amount of money, and the platforms are saying, no, we can't pay that.
Excellent. Dan, thanks again for your time. Please remind our listeners where they can find all your work on the internet and how they can follow you on Twitter.
At Kaplan Sports Biz, and I write for The Athletic, and theathletic.com is the website.
Excellent, Dan. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Pat. Let's dig into some on-the-field action. What are you thinking about spring training so far? I can tell you I'm loving the pitch clock. What about you?
Well, I think this has been a more interesting spring training than most for that reason alone. The rules changes, right?
Yep.
That's been something to kind of watch, and it does take a little bit of getting used to, but it looks like it's a positive. We've sat through many a 3-hour and 20-minute game. I think, my general take on spring training has always been to try to ignore it as much as possible, because the small sample size and the nature of the games often leads people to get overly optimistic or pessimistic about individual players. So-and-so, Jason Hayward had 2 home runs this week. Oh, he's fixed his swing. The Cubs made a terrible mistake. I'm like, get back to me at the end of April, and we'll see how many home runs he has, right? I mean, that's how that works. Now, occasionally there'll be a young player or a veteran struggling to make the team, and they'll do either very well or very poorly, and that might be a story, right? Like, hey, David Bodie's hitting 533 or something of that nature, or Zach McKinstry sitting 167. Whoops, But I'm not worried about, for example, what Patrick Wisdom's batting average is, or Dansby Swanson, or whether various pitchers on the team are doing well or not. If they're sort of veterans and ready to go. The main thing that I worry about in spring training, and the thing that I think should be really how you grade a spring training, is how many people get hurt.
Yep.
Because that's the one bad thing. And so, like, you look at the Dodgers, Jason Hayward had 2 home runs this week. Yeah, but the Dodgers are going to get an F for spring training, because Gavin Lux, their shortstop, is out for the year with an ACL injury, and that is more significant and more important than anything else that's going to happen in their spring training this year. With the Cubs, we've seen already, unfortunately, we're in just the last podcast we were talking about our excitement over Seiya Suzuki and how we thought he was going to have a breakout year. And now with that oblique strain, I mean, that's like the worst kind of injury. It can that's the kind of thing that can linger. It can reoccur. He's going to be out for some time. Will it be a month? Will it be more? Who knows? That's really disappointing in my book. And so when your best hitter is going to be out or potentially less effective this year, to me, that automatically drops the grade down for the Cubs spring training, aside from the stuff that you kind of expected, like the Kyle Hendricks is going to be out for a while. And like that Cody Hoyer, you were hoping that he'd be back, but I mean, it looks like it won't be till after the All-Star break. I mean, that stuff was more baked in. But the Suzuki thing is really a bummer, and hopefully the Cubs will not suffer any more injuries, because especially when it comes to their hitters, as you know, they're a bit thin.
And it's noticeable when you're looking at the outfield without Suzuki, and you're having the conversation of, who plays right field? What does that look like? And it's not a murderer's row of names that that gets you excited. In spring training, we get to see, some of the future outfielders, and we get to see Pete Crow Armstrong and these guys, but they're not making the team. Yeah, Brendan Davis, they're not making the team. So
Yeah, it's great. It's great for them to get up and get some experience and flash some skills and make us hopeful for the future. That hey, there's hope, in the horizon. But that horizon is a bit in the distance. So we're worried about the here and now and March 30th and whatnot, and that's going to be the tough one.
yeah, so definitely with the rules changes, I'm loving the pitch clock. I was surprised that it's controversial, that there's people that don't like the pitch clock. I'm like, who's on that other side of the argument?
I think that people will get used to it, and when they do, they'll never want to go back. I mean, your friend Crowley was on today on Twitter and was talking about how games used to be until about the early, like I think 2012, I think he said, games were a lot shorter, in the past. And I remember growing up, games were much faster. Of course, when you had Greg Maddux on the mound, it could be 2 hours or less. But I really do think like the Moneyball era and the idea of taking pitches and drawing walks and on-base percentage and then coupled with pitchers who got really good and started striking people out. And you went from games where, a pitcher would pitch a complete game, win or lose, a 9-inning complete game with 128 pitches to now, it's not unusual for a team to throw 200 pitches in a game. And it slows things down and sometimes to a crawl. And I think the league has done some stuff to address that, especially with remember the reliever rules, right? We're all used to that now, and I think people are pretty happy with that. But remember the days when Lou Piniella could drag out 6 pitchers in 1 inning if you wanted to, one batter at a time? That took some time, and we don't have to worry about that as much anymore. And I think the pitch clock will be the same. It'll speed things up, and I know Mark Burley would probably be in the Hall of Fame if he'd had a pitch clock, right? Because and Maddux is in the Hall of Fame, but he'd probably be even happier if he had one. Now, on the flip side, I don't know if Steve Traxel and others would appreciate it, and some of the hitters are going to have to get used to it too. The guys who like to, adjust all their body parts and all their equipment in the box, right? So I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. It's not just the time between pitches on the pitcher. What we've seen so far early in spring training is quite a few times where guys had to hustle back into the box because they're bebopping around over there, going through their whole ritual of tightening gloves and tapping this and doing that.
Yeah. And you have to face the pitcher too, which is another interesting phenomenon, right?
Yeah, definitely so definitely adding a sense of urgency where there wasn't before. When there wasn't one, people took their time, and now with a sense of urgency, we're seeing the game speed up, which I think is a better viewing experience for sure. I'm enjoying that. What I worry about is if teams get so used to this that those 2.5 hour game times, if owners start seeing beer sales impacted by these faster games, that 7th inning cutoff is coming earlier and earlier. Do they say, hey, we need to revisit this rule? Hey, what can we do to do we change that 7th inning cutoff to 9th inning? I think that there's going to be some change to some of the beer and concession sales.
I saw an interesting take on that, which is that I guess some minor league teams are asked about that very question. They're like, our sales are about the same. They said the difference is that people stay for the whole 9 innings instead of leaving the 7th. Which,
okay.
That's one way to look at it, right? I mean, who knows, right? We'll see. Certainly at the night games, the Cubs used to have that pretty draconian, was it 9:20 or the 7th inning rule?
Whichever came first. Yeah.
So, I mean, with those types of rules, they kind of quietly got away from that. But, you're right. I mean, there will be a shorter amount of time, although people generally tend to start faster and slow down, I think. Generally, not always. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that plays out. The other thing is, will the actual games be much faster, or will they sneak in extra commercials? I always wonder about that because I don't want to speed up the course of the game only to have the commercial breaks an extra 30 seconds.
Longer inning breaks. Yeah,
yeah.
Where's that clock? We want to keep an eye on that time.
Right, because that's not the idea here, at least not for me. I would like that.
I'm also curious the first time an umpire screws up one of those calls and we see the clock.
Reviewable?
That's a good question, right? That's the question is, because we've seen umpires struggle with, making correct calls, hence the whole robo-umpire movement. And, seeing the time where they don't make the call when the clock expired, or they make the call and the clock still had a second on it. They screw up a call. What's the procedure? I haven't seen that yet this spring.
Aaron Rodgers will hike the ball, snap the ball to him, and the clock's been on 0 for at least 1,000, right? And then he throws a first down pass on 4th down and Bears lose, that kind of thing. That happens a lot in other sports, but at least, if you can review it, that's one thing. The problem in baseball is going to be that, there are a lot of pitches thrown in a game. So umps are going to really have to be on top of that. It's, a second's a second. That's not a lot of time. Like you say, that could be, what's the difference between 1 and 0 and -1?
The other thing I've noted this spring so far is the pitching's been really fun to watch. They had a no-hitter, which is always fun, but
that portends no-hitters for the rest of the year.
While the games don't matter, none of this really matters. The theme holds that a lot of the guys you want to see come out looking like you want to see them look, like Justin Steele, Stroman, Tyone, Wisniewski, even Assad. Everybody's looked pretty good. The Hayden Wisniewski game against Seattle, is he your pick right now, Pat, for the 5th starter spot?
I think he's my pick. I don't think he will be necessarily the 5th starter, but you never know. I would hope that they would do that. He's got to be on the team, I think.
Yeah,
and I'd like to see him. I'd like to see him in a starter role. But for some reason they tend to disappoint me on those kinds of calls. But yeah, he should be.
Evan Altman comes. Go ahead.
No, you first.
I was just going to mention Evan Altman, Cubs insider, friend of the podcast, reported today that the Cubs assigned 8 players to minor league camp on Monday, reducing the spring roster from 74 to 66 players. Of the list of players, Braylon Marquez, obviously.
Who's still hurt, right?
Yes. Maybe? Yeah, obviously the biggest name on that list. None of the names on the list were expected to make the major league team. Marquez is working his way back from shoulder surgery last year, so he's on his own timeline. That is the news coming out from the roster, so they continue to pare it down. We'll see if really that 5th starter spot's really the only really competitive spot at this point.
And I view them as having like 8 5th starters, or eight starters at this point, and not even including Kyle Hendricks, right? Leaving him aside. So, whether somebody starts off as a long reliever or as the 5th starter, especially early in the year when sometimes you don't even need a 5th starter because of the, between rainouts and off days, I'm not, super worried about that at this point. Let's see how people do, as we get further along. But Keegan Thompson's a perfect example of somebody I'd really like to see pitch out of the bullpen, and I think he will. But speaking of starters, though, not 5th starters, but 1st starters, what is your take on the Cubs' 1st starter these days?
It's everything I've seen. Are we in an alignment that it's Marcus Stroman? And if so,
that is right.
He is. He's looked good so far this spring, and I think he's for a Cubs team with this starting rotation, he's the best that's out there. Tyone, I think, was pretty impressive as well. Looking forward to seeing him get some real time in real games, and
But off the field is the the Twitter situation is, I guess, what I was alluding to.
Yeah, always. We'll see how that goes as we get closer to the season. I know that we've all been following that closely, and all are watching it intently to see how that continues to play out with Stroman and the Twitterverse, if you will.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if the team has been very quiet about his most recent tweets, or tweet, I guess, but about Kyrie Irving, but there's going to be some blowback here, and not wrong either. I think it's, in terms of what happens, and once we get back to Chicago away from Arizona, I'm curious to see what the fan reaction is to that, and the team hasn't really made any comments that I know of, at least not as of yet. So at some point they may have to release some kind of a statement too, because.
Well, yeah, I assume that when they announce Stroman as the opening day starter, right, then that's when beat writers have to follow up on that, right? That's when I anticipate the timing. So we'll watch and see how that plays out. The Baseball America, also in the news this week, put out its farm system rankings, Pat. For Baseball America, the Chicago Cubs farm system ranks 16th behind the Cardinals, who are 9th, and the Brewers, who are 13th.
And the Reds, maybe?
Has to be disappointing to see that's where
the Reds are the Reds ahead of the Cubs?
I don't have the it's totally possible, but I do not have that up at the moment.
I just assume they are usually in a lot of these.
But for a team that's doing a rebuild, the focus for the past how many years has been on bolstering this farm system? I know we've seen some rankings that have had them in the top 10, but still a disappointment to be, not in the top 5 even.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that hurts the Cubs and that holds them back is they don't have sort of the top level guys, right? Like when you look at all the top 100 lists, there are 30 teams in baseball, right, or whatever. So you should have a top 30 player. You should have a player who's 31 to 60, and another guy who's 61 to 90, et cetera, right? And the Cubs oftentimes have 3 in the top 100, but they're just not as high, or as highly ranked, and that's the problem. The teams, and I harp on this a lot, but the 14, 15, 16 teams had like the top player in all of baseball, the number 2 player in all of baseball, then top 10 players in all of baseball. And this Cubs team doesn't. It just doesn't, right? Maybe Pete Crow Armstrong works his way up, but right now they just don't have these waves of guys who are just like considered to be can't miss types. And as we know, not all can't miss types survive. I mean, we saw Alcantara and we saw Almora and some others that didn't make it. But it's the problem they have. And in the draft last year, they made a conscious decision to draft a pitcher who they thought they could get cheaper, so they could get another pitcher for more money with the next pick. And it's they passed on some guys who are now considered top 30 prospects in all baseball. So will they be top 30 players in all baseball? Who knows? But that's a decision they've made, and they're going with depth over impact. And in some respects, impact is hard to get unless you're Cubs have done kind of a half job of rebuilding anyway, in that they've never really torn it down to the point where they're like a top 2 or 3 pick. I mean, Chris Bryant was the number 2 pick overall, and I think Baez and Almora and all those guys are like the 7th pick overall. The Cubs have not been quite that bad, so it's harder to get guys, the high end of the draft there. So they've by necessity a little bit too gone with some depth, and time will tell. But 15th or 16th is where we were like a year and a half ago. So it'd be nice to move up. Yeah. And Baseball America could be wrong too. So
correct. It's one of many rankings, but
they've done better in others.
But still, it's never in the conversation of the top farm systems.
Well, I guess the frustrating part to me is that the Cubs are always like the fourth best farm system in their own division.
In their own.
Now, some of those teams are never going to build a team around a good farm system, thankfully. But it is when, like, if the Brewers or the Cardinals are ahead of you, that's depressing because those are the teams that you're trying to compete against. And if their on-field major league talent is better than yours, and their farm system looks better, it gets frustrating.
Right, and that spits in the face of you have to be bad to build up your farm system. It's you can't be competitive and then get a farm system, and then you look and you see teams like the Cardinals.
Gosh, the Cardinals have managed.
The Dodgers
have managed to do that. Yeah. And the Cubs just haven't been able to manage that over these. It's actually kind of mind-boggling when you think about. I mean, the Cubs traded away some of their players, right? So they traded away Jimenez and
that was so long ago now. It's 2017.
But that's a long time ago, right? And then they had this period of 5 years where, you look at the players who came up, and Justin Steele is here and Keegan Thompson, but boy, they missed on so many, especially bats, right? How many? Nico Horner is kind of almost a lone exception.
Yeah,
for the last 5 years. He was here. He was there in 2017, wasn't he? Anyway, it's been frustrating. But Fangraphs has Pico Armstrong as the number 14 player in the game, so that's good. And hopefully he'll be up next year because they just need somebody to hit. I really hope Brendan Davis takes off and joins the big league team at some point. Especially, it'd be great if he could be there now with Suzuki's injury, frankly. But it'd be great to see him come up after what happened last year. Kevin Alcantara, it's some of these guys, you hope come up, but you have to be realistic too. If guys are in A ball, it's or high A or just starting double A, it's might take a little while. So I think Brendan Davis is probably our best bet for now.
Last question from me, then we'll call it a podcast, Pat. Are you excited? Are you looking forward to the World Baseball Classic? It's March 7th to the 21st. Are you looking forward to it? Suzuki obviously out with his oblique strain, as we mentioned. He will not be playing for Team
A lot of
Japan.
guys are going to be missing that, it looks like, around the league.
Yep.
So that takes some of the luster out of it. I liked it better when Carlos Zambrano was around. I don't know, it's just more fun. But no, I mean, it's fine. It's definitely going to be a little bit. I guess I don't know. Like, how does that work? So if you're not participating in that, then and you're in spring training, I guess there are more at bats for people and more innings to pitch for people who otherwise would have not gotten them because other players would have who are now off playing this thing. And vice versa. So, it's probably good overall. I just don't want anybody to get hurt. That's my number one goal here. No injuries.
Yeah, it's at least, we just talked about all the reasons why, watching spring training games are what they are. You're watching for not injuries and seeing an inning of someone's performance. Hopefully, a lot of these guys these will be pretty competitive games, and you'll be able to see some guys competing in an actual competitive scenario. So it's I like it better than the idea of spring training in general. So this will be
there's more at stake, right?
More
because
at stake.
You care about your country and you care about winning games that count.
And there's a couple fun teams, like the Dominican Republic team is always fun.
Sure.
The Japanese team is always fun. The Venezuelan team, and there's a lot of the Cuban team, of course. There's a lot of very familiar names, a lot of interesting teams and lineups that I'm looking forward to watching here in March. So
something to watch. in addition to spring training, right?
Yep.
So
Mm-hmm.
let me ask you this quick question before we go.
Yep.
What is the over-under in your mind on Kyle Hendricks starts for the Cubs this year?
Now, this is not our official prediction episode. That is coming up before the season. We'll have Evan Altman back on to do official predictions. But Kyle Hendricks starts with the Cubs. So there's the possibility that Kyle Hendricks is decent. The Cubs are not in it, and he's traded at the trade deadline potentially. That's something that could
possible.
There's also the possibility that he just never gets right and doesn't hold that job. So number of starts, maybe I'm thinking in the 20s.
Oh, really? For the Cubs?
I think so.
I was going to say 8.5.
Think so?
Well, I don't think he plays in April, and I think your scenario maybe he plays in May and June, and then gets traded.
That's the he's doing well scenario. I don't have confidence in that.
That's true too. Or he's doing poorly and he's not starting. I mean, he had 16 starts last year. Felt like more. He was so good on opening day last year, by the way, against the Brewers.
Yeah.
And then, he didn't pitch after July 5th.
I could
also see another injury too, that curtails his season. But if you're the Cubs and let's say you're not competing for a playoff spot, and let's say Kyle Hendricks is kind of mediocre or kind of middle of the road, do you want to give those innings to who do you want to give those innings to, I guess? Would you rather see what Caleb Killian can do a second time? Do you want to see what Hayden is going to do, or one of these, Brown? I don't know, somebody like what's the?
Yeah, I think that's the most likely scenario. Is he's mediocre, doesn't get traded. The Cubs aren't competitive, and you have to decide. Yeah, does he get those innings? Does he get 20 starts because you're eating innings and getting through another year, or do you give it to more of the guys you want to evaluate? That's an interesting question, and it's a question of how we've seen how they treat their veterans. It takes a long time to get them out of the lineup sometimes.
If the Cubs are planning on competing in 2024, which I will, for sake of sanity and argument, say yes, they are, then they need to find out in 2023 who's going to be part of that. You can't go into the competitive year with a bunch of guys and throw them out there and try to figure out who's going to, who's got it and who doesn't, right? You want to have some certainty ahead of time so that you can go out and acquire other players if you need to, or at least know, which spots in the rotation you feel are full, et cetera. So
I think I've talked myself down.
Yeah.
I think might be single digits even. So we'll see. Well, hopefully he gets right and the Cubs have a better year than we're anticipating.
I would like him to get right. I'd like him to do well and have a good run with the Cubs, and then maybe get traded to a team that's going to the playoffs so that he can play in the playoffs another time. Assuming the Cubs aren't. Of course, the Cubs are in the playoffs, even better. And maybe be a contributor on a playoff team as he nears the end of his career.
Yes, we big Kyle Hendricks fans, all the best for him. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast this week. We'll be back on a more regular schedule here as spring training is heating up. So make sure you stay subscribed to the podcast. We're on any podcatcher of choice. Make sure you're telling your Cub fan friends about the show. Show them how to subscribe. And make sure that you're We're talking all platforms, not just podcatchers. We're also on YouTube. The audio version of this podcast is available there as well. You can subscribe at Wrigleyville Nation Podcast on YouTube as well. And we have a Patreon. That's how we stay ad-free here, because we have patrons that support this show financially. They help us keep the show with no ads. When that dollar amount gets below a threshold and we start owing money for doing this podcast, then we start bringing in advertisers, and nobody wants that. So make sure that you're continue to support the show if you're enjoying what you're hearing. $1 even goes a long way. So make sure every single penny goes right back into paying for the hosting fees, the website.
We know how to stretch $1, don't we?
Exactly. We've been doing it for years. So yeah, make sure that you're supporting the show, helping us keep it ad free. Thank you to all the patrons who do that currently, and all the future ones that are going to do that this season. So again, thank you very much. And with that, we are calling it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.